Thank you very much for the invitation to be here today. I have been looking incredibly much forward to come back to Athens to join the forum this year, and I was happy to recognize my colleague Ole Hansen in the video as he was representing us last year. I will get going. I will speak no more than 15 minutes. But I have many important messages to bring to you from the UN and from the UN Global Compact and how we are faring on the Sustainable Development Goals at the moment. So for those of you that might not know the UN Global Compact so well, I just wanted to start by introducing that the initiative was founded by the former UN Secretary General, Kofi Annan, back in year 2000. He basically suggested to a large group of CEOs at the World Economic Forum in Davos that now would be a good moment to create a global compact between the United Nations and the private sector, basically to give globalization a human face. And I think that's just as relevant today as it was back in those years, and you see that the following Secretary Generals have continued being the protector of our initiative, and Mr. Antonio Guterres is today the chairman of the board of the UN Global Compact, that is also co-chaired by Mr. Paul Polman, the CEO from Unilever, and Bola Adesola, who is the CEO of Standard Chartered Bank in Nigeria. What happened, let me show you this one. So the Global Compact started 18 years ago with being 40 companies that joined up around the 10 principles that you see in my slide here, relating to human rights, the environment, anti-corruption, and labor. Today, we are more than 9,500 companies across the world, large and small companies, but in more than 160 countries. We have more than 70 local networks that we are working to strengthen these days and to find really good partners in all the countries across the world to work together with, just as the case is here in Greece. We also have a large group of civil society members of our initiative, which is a really important part as well, because we are indeed a multi-stakeholder initiative. So you also see a couple of other numbers. We have close to 30% of the Fortune 500 companies in our initiative, but we also have many small companies that we are very proud of, and we have close to 66 million employees working for a company that is part of the Global Compact. So this is how the initiative looks today. And as I was saying, we are very much partnership-based, so we are working together with many, many organizations like ours across the world. I believe that during the day today, there has been a lot of conversation around the Sustainable Development Goals or the global goals. I have been working for the UN close to 3 years now. So the first thing that happened after I joined was the adaptation of the Agenda 2030 and the 17 goals. And I can assure you that everyone who was participating in this event will never forget about it. It was amazing to have all the member states of the UN unanimously agreeing on a new agenda for the world and 17 goals with more than 160 indicators that all nations at the UN agreed to follow. And of course, all the colleagues across the UN system, like UN Women who are here today, we have teamed up and aligned to really make sure that we support as we best can from the whole of UN in driving the goals across the world. So it is a new agenda for the world. For us at the Global Compact, it's very important to say that striving for the goals in the future must always build on the 10 principles. If all companies were adhering to human rights, anti-corruption, and the other principles, it would take us very far in actually achieving the goals. So that is very much where we come from, building on solid principles and universal declarations that are all anchored at the UN. So let's have a quick look at how we are faring on the global goals today. So we are almost 3 years into the goals. Soon we will have worked with the goals for 1,000 days. And there's an amazing momentum among companies across the world. No matter where I go, the US, Africa, Europe, Latin America, where we just had a big meeting in Argentina, there's a lot of interest for the goals. At the same time, if you analyze how much we have progressed on all the goals so far, there are 2 areas that are major gaps. One of them is the climate change area, and very closely related to that, the oceans, that these days are coming up as a key theme in the Sustainable Development Agenda. The other big theme where the world is lacking very much behind the global goals is on inequality. We live in a very unequal world. Today, 1% of the population in the world owns more than the remaining 99%. And that gives instability in the world and poses very specific problems for specific populations in the world. So I would particularly like to emphasize the gender gap in the world. And I think it has been addressed already today. But so far, we have been talking about it would take 80 years to close the gender gap. This year, the estimate is it will take 100 years to close the gender gap. And last week, when Fortune 500 published their annual list in the US, it became apparent that the number of female CEOs of US companies have dropped with 25% in 1 year. I think that has never happened before, and it says a little bit about the challenges that we have on the whole gender agenda. Another area that's a huge challenge across the world is children and young people. Close to 30% of young people today are not in any form of education and don't have a proper job. So that's a major challenge as well, and a challenge that we as companies have a huge role to play in. And I say we as companies because I used to work more than 25 years for executive management in multinational companies, so I still feel very much like a business person, even though I do work for the UN. But the important thing, whenever we talk about the global goals, is of course to be aware of the risks that the development in the world is posing for all of us and for businesses. But how can those risks be turned into opportunities for the world and for companies? And just to give you a few examples, if we were able to close the gender gap and give women the same access to the working market as men, there would be a $28 trillion upside on the global GDP. So that's a major opportunity. I had the pleasure of participating in the Business Commission for Sustainable Development that put out a very nice report with a lot of good economic data. So I have picked a few of these data to share with you. So for example, within only 4 industries, energy, cities, food, and health, there's a 12 trillion upside in the market if the market would focus on the areas of the global goals. And in terms of creating new jobs, in the same 4 industries in the different regions that I have listed, there are, for example, more than 70 million new jobs just in India. So my point is that the global goals should be seen by business as a way of turning risks into opportunities. But of course, it requires an innovative mindset, and it does require rethinking companies' business models, taking inspirations from the global goals. But we are seeing this happening big time already. So in our progress report for 17, we looked at a sample of more than 2,000 Global Compact companies. And the good news is that more than 75% of these companies, big and small, any places in the world, 75% have already picked up the Global Goals agenda. In these companies, close to 70% of the companies, the initiatives are led by the CEO, which means that it's part of a very strategic business agenda that is going on in the boardroom. And to me, that's another piece of very good news, because we need the global goals to sit in the middle of the board table as part of the business strategy, because it is about turning risks into business opportunities. You also see on this slide which of the goals are the most popular among companies. Decent work and economic growth, health, quality education, gender equality. If you're interested, you can look at the progress report. It's sitting on our website, and it has these data broken much more down into different areas, into different regions and industries. But I think it's important to note, for those of us that have been working for many years on sustainable business, we have never seen at any time before companies picking up such a global sustainability agenda in the way that it's happening these days. So my message also is to all the companies in the room, this agenda is important. It's not going to go away. It has been picked up big time by the financial sector. And when that happens, things get really interesting, because then some of these goals, human rights, climate change, and so on, become part of the way that the financial sector evaluate companies and whether they want to do business with them, lend them money, or whatever. So this is something to watch out for. I also want to give you a very brief update on where we are at the Global Compact today and what we think the priorities are. What is it we should focus on now? And what are some of the good tools that we can put forward together with many of the other tools that are out there already? So in our view, the very simple, very important, very pragmatic things for priorities for companies to do right now is to act responsibly, it's to find opportunities, and it's to inspire and advocate. So the recommendation is have the CEO sign up to the goals and the principles. So it's anchored solidly in the organization and make sure to report once a year. On finding opportunities, that's very much an innovation agenda, but it's a positive agenda. And on inspiring and advocating, it's our vision to create a global movement of responsible companies and organizations to create the world that we all want, together with our partners. And businesses are a very important part of that. So let me quickly give you a couple of examples on how companies can address these three priorities and how we are sort of trying to support that. So at the Global Compact, we have created an academy with access for all companies, big and small, to learn about the principles and the global goals. And just as an example, actually today, this afternoon, we have a program running with the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Said al-Hussein, who is explaining what is a good way for businesses to deal with all the human rights challenges that are out there today. And we are offering this kind of academy and this kind of learning opportunities also on climate change, on sustainable finance, and many other areas as well, with some of the world's experts in these areas. Oops. When it comes to finding opportunities, it's always good to look at what other people are doing and taking inspiration from that. So we have created a site called the Global Opportunity Explorer. It has more than 500 concrete business cases or solutions showing how companies in many different industries have made great business cases from picking up one or more of the SDGs. And you see examples turning plastic waste into currency, adapting city for resilience and biodiversity, and knowledge for peace. So if you need inspiration for how other companies are translating the global goals into business opportunities, have a look at the Global Opportunity Explorer. Another way of finding opportunities is when we meet with companies, with UN agencies, with our local networks, with our partners, in a multi-stakeholder think tank to explore some of the new interfaces between the goals and the principles. So what I'm showing here is the action platforms that we are offering as learning platforms these days on reporting, on breakthrough innovation, on financial innovation for the goals, on climate, on health, on decent work in the supply chain, just to show you a couple of examples. But this idea of learning together is really important. And since we are part of the UN, we have the opportunity to issue a set of principles, a guideline after this work is completed. And of course, it's interesting for companies and many other stakeholders to be part of this work. And I want to mention actually one example of this, the women empowerment principles that was already mentioned earlier today, that the UN Women and Global Compact created some years ago together with a multi-stakeholder group, exactly as an example of the kind of output that we have from this kind of work. The newest action platform that we will actually be launching next week in New York is on oceans. And I really wanted to share that with you today, because at least in my mind, Greece is the, how should I say, shipping nation of the world. I have to say that the Norwegian government is supporting us in creating this platform. The purpose is to address a number of the risks that we are experiencing in our oceans these days: plastic, nutrification, the disappearance of coral reefs, waste from many of the households, and many issues that we really need to take action on right now at this moment. So it will be exciting to see how we can also derive concrete activities when we begin to take action on the oceans theme. So finally, in terms of inspiring and advocating, meetings like this are hugely important, where people get together, where we all get an opportunity to share our learnings, what goes well, what does not go so well. And I would like to invite you today to join us for the summit in September at the UN Global Compact, and also for the high-level meeting in New York in July, that I feel is becoming more and more important as the meeting where governments come to New York to present their action plans for the goals together with the local networks and the more national perspective. We have just made a call for our next class of pioneers. Every year, we appoint 10 SDG pioneers that we celebrate because they are amazing leaders and amazing inspirations to everyone else. And it's better to tell a story about the goals by using great examples, concrete examples from companies and real people, instead of talking about 17 goals and 160 indicators. So we like to show the people that are doing this in real life in their business, and some of them are up here. If anybody feels in this room that you know somebody that qualifies to become an SDG pioneer, nominate them, because this is the nomination phase. We will celebrate the 10 pioneers big time in September, because they have all really deserved that. So let me just end with a quote from one of my favorite philosophers, of course, Socrates today, who said, "The secret of change is to focus all your energy on not fighting the old, but on building the new." That is the challenge in driving the global goals forward, and we have less than 4,500 days left So we better get going, and we need every one of you to be part of the movement. Thank you.